Assalamu alaikum, welcome. You are listening to the Mariam Mukonda Show on Salam Media. We are also live on Facebook. If you have any comments, questions, queries, or suggestions, you may leave them in the comment section below, or you can send it to our WhatsApp line on 061 766 0355. Adoption is the process where a person applies in court to be considered as the parent of a child. The adoption process in South Africa is different from the adoption processes across the world. Joining me on the line right now to talk about the adoption process is adoption social worker at ABBA Specialist Adoption and Social Services, Frida Tanton. Good morning, Frida. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning, madam.
All right. So first of all, is adopting a child in South Africa an easy process?
It's not an easy process, and there's a good reason for that. A child's identity and future changes when you do adoption. So it is a process that we take great care to make sure that it is a process that checks all the balances, and you do all due diligence to make sure that the best interest of the child is served with an adoption. But it's also not the most difficult process.
So who may be adopted? What are the age groups of kids that can be adopted?
A child under the age of 18 can be adopted. Realistically, we don't always see that many older children being adopted, but mostly children, younger children, are what people are interested in adopting. So when they come, they will state a preference for younger children, but any child until the age of 18 can be adopted.
Now, speaking of adopted kids, who can apply to adopt a child?
Well, the law is very clear. They say anybody over the age of 18 can apply to adopt, whether they're single, whether they're married, whether they're in a living relationship, whether it's the biological father of the child. So any person over the age of 18 can apply to adopt a child, but any person who do apply to adopt a child needs to undergo a screening process with an accredited adoption social worker to make sure that they are fit and proper to assume the rights and responsibilities for a child.
All right, so take us through this process. So you mentioned that it's can be either an easy process or a difficult one. Please take us through it.
Okay, so normally what happens, you will express your interest to adopt a child. Once you've done that, you will engage with a social worker. A social worker will explain to you the process, managing your expectations in terms of the length of the process, in terms of what is required, what the process is like, what the duration, what the different steps in the process are basically. And in that, they will also explain to you, because organizations approach us differently. I'm going to talk from our side. What we do is we will normally have about 4 interviews with people where we look at several aspects of their functioning. We will look at their relationships, their support system. We would look at also your faith base. It doesn't mean it needs to be a certain faith, but we all have something that we hold on to when things are tough. And we need to investigate what is that grounding for you. What is your motive for adoption? Is it motive of wanting to have a helper, or is it something that I want to provide for a child? So we would look at all those things in the process. We'll also look at your health. Can you look after a child? Do you have the energy? Do you have, the basic surroundings? But also as part of our process, we do a preparation group, because we see a screening for adoption not so much as finding reasons to disqualify people. We see it as an opportunity to empower people and to qualify them to be adoptive parents. So we will talk very specifically in our preparation group about the challenges of adoption. How do you make sure you bond with a 6-month-old baby? Because obviously there's some prior learning that the child already have experienced. has experienced. And then also we would talk about how to tell your child about an adoption. How do you make provision for the difficulties of adoptions? For instance, in the case of interrace adoption, or adopting an older child, or adopting a child with special needs. So those are the kind of things that we speak on very specifically, and then we conclude the process with a home visit.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And what about,
Mhm.
sorry about that. What about the mental health?
The mental health of a parent is definitely something that we look at. If we have any concerns, we will send them for an assessment at a registered um, psychologist or psychiatrist. Basically, and I think the process is designed, and the way we empower you and we talk to you, that people feel comfortable to actually express who they really are. And we often pick up in the process that there is some issues. Such as depression, anxiety, and we don't then go and immediately disqualify a person based on that. We would prefer to rather refer the person and see, with the assistance of a professional, if we can get that person on a level where they are less anxious and less depressed, so that they are able to actually look after a child,
Mm-hmm.
be a parent.
Now, according to an article that the demographics will determine whether the process takes longer than usual or not. For example, black babies or colored babies are the process will be much less shorter than that. Please explain that to us a bit more.
I don't think it's the process so much that is shorter. I think it's the waiting period maybe that it refers to. Um, if we look at the demographics of our society at the moment, if you want to adopt a black child, there are more black children available for adoption. So your waiting time for a child will be shorter than if, for instance, you wanted a white child. Just to give you a little bit, just my statistics, as one adoption social worker, I would typically do in a year adoptions of between 40 and 50 black babies, but only 2 white babies. So that
Mm-hmm.
is, it's not, the process is exactly the same. The screening that you go through is exactly the same. The fees you pay are even exactly the same. The difference come with a waiting period that's significantly longer.
Mm-hmm. And how long does interested parent have to wait in order to before they can get the child?
I think it's important to point out that it's based on your preferences. If you are open in
Mm-hmm.
terms of age, in terms of gender of the child, in terms of the race of the child, then your waiting period shouldn't really be much longer than 3 to 4 months. That is for ABBA. Uh, Realistically, if you want a specific gender, for instance, you are very you prefer to adopt a girl, your waiting period could be longer because immediately you're cutting the number of available children in half. If you want a child under a year, it also, so your preferences places limitations on who we can match you with, and that influences the waiting period negatively.
Mm-hmm. Can a person adopt 2 or 3 kids at once?
Only if they are related. When we talk about adoption, one of the challenges you heard me refer to the preparation group earlier on. And one of the things we talk about this at length is the emotional needs of an adopted child and the bonding process that need to take place. So to take 3, for instance, unrelated children and place them in a family all at the same time and have to redo that whole process, in the end, we find that that's hardly ever in the best interest of the child, because each child needs to get his individual time to bond with a specific family and to form a secure attachment, because that's the basis of mental health.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So who must give consent to an adoption, and can the consent be withdrawn?
Yes, any consent can be withdrawn at any court, no matter where it was signed, but it needs to be withdrawn within 60 days of signing the consent.
Mm-hmm. And when is consent not required?
Consent is always required. As the law puts it, there are exceptions. The only exceptions are when we don't know who the parents are. When when the child's been abandoned, for instance, then we obviously cannot give their consent because we don't know their whereabouts or their identities. Other instances where consent are sometimes not required is in the case of a rape. If the child was conceived as a result of rape, then the magistrate can decide, the social worker doesn't decide this on her own. The magistrate can then decide to proceed uh, by dispensing the biological father's right to give consent to the adoption based on the fact it was a crime. And then also last, sometimes we also find that fathers do not want to come forward. They do not want to become part of this process. And then they will be sent a notice to appear in court and bring reasons as to why this adoption cannot proceed. And should they not attend court based on the notice that was sent to them, the magistrate can also decide to dispense with the rights of the biological father or mother or
Mm-hmm.
whoever was necessary.
Mm-hmm. No, we watch a lot of television programs about adoption and surrogacy and how things go wrong at the end. But on your side, are there any consequences of the adoptions?
Yeah, fortunately, we don't live in a soap, so very few of the cases we see in the soaps and um, of how adoptions actually play out and parents coming forward and grabbing their children back and everybody left with heartache doesn't really happen because one of the things that ABBA is very specific about is that we only place a child once. The whole adoptability process is finalized. So a magistrate is actually said on paper this child is adoptable. So that really reduces the chances of somebody coming forward and saying, but this is my child, I need to be involved in this process. Yeah, to the point where it almost cuts it out. In most cases, it cuts it out completely. So we don't see that really that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But what we need to, when we talk about the consequences of adoption, we need to know that the consequences for adoption mainly rest on the child. Because and on the child's emotional makeup and how they adjust in life and how they process this whole thing that's happened to them by being abandoned at birth, by having a mom who decided to not continue my life journey with me and rather let that become somebody else's responsibility. For a child, that plays really heavily on their minds. And if I need to say what I see as the most or the hardest consequence of adoption, it's normally for the adopted child.
And lastly, what are the costs involved in the adoption process?
The cost involved in the adoption process is actually really nicely set out in the Children's Act according to Regulation 107. So I think anybody can go online and Google it. It um, puts out really nicely where that you can charge certain fees for certain things, and but mostly these fees are aimed at um, remunerating a social worker for the time that's spent on an adoption. So you don't pay for the child, you pay for the social worker's time. And these fees are very closely related to the time that a specific social worker has to spend on an adoption. Having said that, the adoption might work out to be some random amount, but you as a person cannot afford that fee. And and ABBA is one of them. Most of these adoption agencies will actually say we have a sliding scale that we can look at. We can meet you halfway because we don't want money ever to stand between somebody's dreams of becoming a parent.
Mm-hmm. And contact ABBA should they require any more information or to adopt a child as well?
They can send us an email. We've got a team that responds to these emails, and we normally would respond within 48 hours to all emails. And the email address is info@abbaadoptions.co.za. And I can just point out that ABBA has offices in the Eastern Cape, Gauteng, Western Cape, Northwest Province, and Limpopo. So we cover most of the provinces in South Africa. And should you be from a province that we cannot cover, we will refer you to a service provider in that area.
All right, so thank you so much for the information. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much.
That was Frida Tanton, from the adoption social worker at ABBA Specialist Adoption and Social Services. Should you require more information, you can send an email to info@abbaadoption.co.za, and they will gladly assist you within 48 hours. And you've heard for yourself that the adoption process, it can be a short one and can be a long one depending on your preferences as well. Your preferences will actually determine how long the process will take. And there is so much information available on the internet, but if you can contact ABBA, they will gladly help you there. The email once again is info@abba abbaadoption.co.za. Do stay with us. We will be right back.